Hi, hello, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I am the Antichrist. No, I'm just kidding, but I do want you to join my cult. All you have to do is click subscribe, and it also helps to click the like and the notification bell so you never miss our next meeting. If you're not new here, you're probably getting excited for the Oscars, which is where we basically host our own version of the Oscars. We have really fun categories like Best Death, Best Breakout Actor and Actress, and things like that. And the best part is the audience gets to vote on the winners. I know that a lot of my subs were expecting my next video to be the Oscars, so hopefully this is a happy surprise. But I am working with 11 other content creators to get that video done, and so most of them have day jobs, some of them have children, plans change a little bit. So I thought that I would supplement the downtime with this kind of bonus little fun video. But what am I doing today? Let's get to that. So you probably saw the title in the thumbnail, unless you're a very devoted member of this coven and you just click on anything I post right away. Well done. But today I want to talk about horror TV shows, which I almost never do. I pretty much exclusively talk about movies. That is unless I am doing my monthly wrap-ups, but even then, I don't talk that much about the TV shows that I watch. And this past month or so, I've been getting really into TV again. I used to be a really avid TV watcher as a teenager, but these days not so much. Now I have much more of a focus on horror movies, but I'm getting back into TV, and I'm loving it. I'm having a great time. I just started the show Severance, and that was kind of what inspired this video. Well, a couple of things inspired this video. So I was watching Severance, and not to be dramatic, but it might be one of the best TV shows I've ever watched in my entire life. And as I was watching it, my eyes kind of wandered down to my shelves because I have all my movies on display. And my eye caught on the Belko experiment, and I thought to myself, wow, these concepts are kind of similar. These have a similar vibe. And then I was like, oh, light bulb. That would be a good idea for a video because I know a lot of people are avid TV watchers and a lot of people are movie watchers, and sometimes that doesn't have overlap. But if you want to start getting into one or the other, this is the perfect video for you if you're a horror fan. The other reason why I decided to make this video is because when you search something like movies that are similar to Stranger Things, a bunch of bullshit comes up. Like, how is The Craft Legacy or The Maze Runner anything like Stranger Things, please? So Google was absolutely no help to me on this endeavor. I came up with this list entirely on my own. Now, there are a lot of really good horror shows that I've unfortunately never seen. For example, some of my list are Brand New Cherry Flavor, Salem, Penny Dreadful. One that I've promised my subs that I'm going to watch soon is The Boys, but I was just talking actually with my friend's dad who works on the show. He's one of their sound mixers, and he informed me that we're probably not going to get season 4 until about spring of next year. Apparently there was something funky about the VFX they got done for season 4. They really didn't like it, and so they needed to hire a new studio. But because there is such high demand and not enough studios that do the VFX, they just keep on pushing and pushing season 4 of The Boys, so we're probably not going to get it for about another year. And so I know I said it was next on my list a little while back, but I am going to push that off a little bit longer because I'm a binger. That's why I didn't start watching Yellowjackets until this year, because season 2 just started coming out. So that being said, by any means, at any point during this video, drop down below your recommendations for horror TV shows and the movies that are kind of similar to them, or just recommendations in general. It's been a long time since I've done just a good old recommendations video, so glad to be back. And it's unscripted, so today is just all about that improv. We're getting wild and funky today. Okay, so first up, since I already kind of went over this one, would be Severance. Severance is a hard show to explain. I've also decided not to look up any synopses and like read them off, but to try to explain it on my own. And you know why? It's because I'm not afraid of looking stupid. So Severance basically is about this guy played by Adam Scott. We love Adam Scott. And he works at this company where they split their workers' psyches. One half of their psyche only exists at work. The other half only exists outside of work. So there's an elevator they go into where they transition basically. And their personality is entirely split. Neither has any idea what goes on with the other side of their personality. It's a trip. It is one of the best critiques on capitalism I've ever seen. And it trips me out. It's really dark in that way, but I think it's fantastic. We just got Apple TV, so I had just never been able to watch it before, but it's, like I said, one of the best shows I've ever seen. Also directed by Ben Stiller, which I think is just wild. So obviously one of the movies that I chose to pair with this one is The Belko Experiment. This movie is kind of like Saw, but in The Office, almost. It's been a few years since I've seen it, and now after watching Severance, I'm really itching for a rewatch. But a bunch of these coworkers get trapped in an office building, and there's this godlike voice coming down and basically making them perform morality morality tests. So if you know the classic one with the train and the people tied down, like, do you kill one person or let all 5 people die? Like, do you play God? They play a lot of games like that in the Belko experiment. So I think that's a great tie-in, not only because it's office horror, but also because there are these questions of morality brought up and where do you step in? Where do you use the limited power that you have? Another one that I decided to throw in with Severance is Mayhem, which stars Stephen Yeun and Samara Weaving. Gotta love them. Mayhem is also an office quarantine movie, so they and all their coworkers get trapped in this office building, but it's because there's been a breakout of this virus that makes them very violent with one another. Basically, it strips them of all their impulse control. So that one is also really interesting. I wouldn't say that the Belko experiment and Mayhem are particularly strong movies, either of them, but I would say that both of them are worth the one-time watch, especially now because everybody loves Stephen Yeun and Samara Weaving. They're always worth watching. And the Belko experiment is just really interesting. Maybe not as much for the movie itself, but for the questions that it poses, because it makes you think about them too. Any other office horror movies that you guys know of, put those down below, because that's a really like niche little subcategory of horror that I actually really like. Up next would be Wednesday. I don't think I need to give a synopsis for this show. We all watched it, right? If you didn't, I'm sure you're already familiar with the Addams family. This iteration of the story just follows Wednesday as she goes to a school for outcasts, basically. But the thing that's most outstanding about it probably is that the world feels so lived in and it's so magical and it's so very Tim Burton. By the way, watch my giant Tim Burton documentary, basically, that I put out a few months ago. I cover all his controversies, his entire career. I think it was a great video, so check that out. But that being said, as the standout of Wednesday, the movie that I recommend to go along with it is Dark Shadows. This is also Tim Burton, but this is one of his most underrated movies, I would say. It's not good, alright, let's just start there, but it has some of the most fun performances from the actors in the movie. Michelle Pfeiffer is there. Eva Green is just, she's flawless in this movie. It's probably my favorite role of hers ever. Unfortunate that it's in Dark Shadows, but she's still so fun to watch. I think it's an excellent pairing because they're both dripping in a gothic style. Dark Shadows also takes place in the 70s. All the production design is flawless. Like, you really feel so transported by it. And that's exactly how Wednesday made me feel too. So give that one a go if you were a fan of Wednesday. I love this. I feel like I'm doing wine pairings or something. Up next, we have a classic, The Twilight Zone. Now, I have not seen Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone, the one that came out in 2019, but now I can, because here's a tip for you. They took it off of, I think it was on Peacock, but now it is streaming for free on Amazon Prime. But it's only free with ads, so you do have to watch it with ads on Freevee, but still, it's there. And I think that's a much more popular streaming service, so now more people can watch it, including myself. Anyways, I'm talking about the show from the 50s, the original show. It's the one that I grew up on. My grandparents were a big fan of it, and so I thought it would be only fitting to pair this one with one of my favorite horror movies from the 1950s, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I know that a lot of people prefer the one from the 70s. I personally don't. I do think that it is because I grew up with this one, but if you're looking for a proper pairing with the original Twilight Zone show, then don't watch the remake. Watch this one, trust me. Part of the charm of the Twilight Zone for me is that it's shot in black and white. I love black and white, and this movie, of course, is in black and white as well. It follows this doctor as his town slowly seems to succumb to some sort of ailment that takes away all of their emotion. But given the title of the movie, you know that there's a sci-fi kind of twist in there. It feels pretty much exactly like an episode of The Twilight Zone, and if you love the show but you've never seen that movie, please give it a go. Or if you love that movie and you've never seen The Twilight Zone, then watch the show. I think it is also on Amazon Prime, could be mistaken. Now, this little portion of the video, I am gonna leave a timestamp for when you can skip it because I'm gonna talk about American Horror Story. I have a movie to recommend for all of the first 10 seasons. I haven't watched season 11 yet. I wasn't planning on it, but now Emma Roberts just announced that she's coming back for season 12, or she didn't announce it, but you know, Pop Crave probably did. So now I'm like, okay, the Queen is returning. I guess maybe I'll try to reawaken my interest for that show. Okay, so I'm editing now, and I was gonna find an image of the news report that Emma is coming back to American Horror Story, and tell me why I was right now years old when I realized that Kim Kardashian is also going to be in season 12. Maybe I will not be seated for that. I don't think I will be. I love the first 5 seasons, and that's about it. But that being said, I still have good recommendations for all of the first 10 seasons. But just in general, because I felt like these movies didn't have any specific tie-in to a specific season, I wanted to shout them out first. So just in general, if you like American Horror Story, I recommend Hellraiser. The reason is because both the show and that movie, they are very gritty and and very sexual. So if that's kind of all you're looking for, then go with Hellraiser, or another one that kind of falls in that category is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. And if you haven't seen the first A Nightmare on Elm Street, of course watch that one first. It doesn't matter so much, like there really isn't that much continuity anywhere in the A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, except I guess between like 4 and 5, but that's really it. If you really wanted to, you could throw on the first sequel, and I don't think it would matter so much. And the last movie I would generally recommend if you enjoy American Horror Story is actually The Evil Dead. And honestly, the original or the remake, I think both of them are very dark and gritty and grimy and super gory. I would lean more so towards the remake though, because that came out during the same era as some of the best years of American Horror Story. So starting with season 1 of American Horror Story, which would be Murder House, given that it's kind of a paranormal story that's very much centered on the family drama, I thought that I would recommend some sort of family paranormal horror movies. So up first we have 13 Ghosts. This one is a little bit more ridiculous and maybe not quite the tone of American Horror Story. And yes, this is the remake. I do enjoy the original movie too from I think 1960, but definitely not as much. That one's just a lot of fun. Stars Matthew Lillard. There's a lot of really great looking ghosts in it. And that one was very reminiscent of American Horror Story to me because the ghosts are so solid. They just look like people in makeup, and that's how it is in American Horror Story too. The other one that I recommend with season 1 is Mike Flanagan's Oculus. This one is much darker than 13 Ghosts, so if you're looking for a darker, maybe slightly more depressing kind of a vibe, then go with Oculus. This movie is very non-linear. It follows these two people as children and adults as they deal with this haunted mirror in their home and what it does to their family. I love Oculus. I don't know if that's a super popular opinion, but it's also kind of nostalgic for me. It came out when I was a teenager, so highly recommend, especially if you really enjoy Murder House. Season 2 of American Horror Story is Asylum, and so there's a bunch of different things going on. I think it can be best explained by the movies that I recommend with it. So first up will be The Exorcist, just a classic that you should watch if you never have. This one I included because in Asylum there is sort of a possession, demonic storyline that goes on in it, so that one's a pretty obvious tie-in, probably don't need to explain that. Another movie I recommend to pair with this season is The Silence of the Lambs. This season also deals with kidnapping and very much gives me a Buffalo Bill kind of vibe. In fact, I think that that was one of the inspirations for the show even, if I remember correctly. But lastly, given the name of the season that it's literally called Asylum, I would also recommend John Carpenter's The Ward. Not a good movie, but it is the last movie that John Carpenter ever directed. Basically in The Ward, there is a girl named Katie and she's been admitted to, I guess it's like this psychiatric hospital or something, and she's haunted by the presence of a former patient. I personally feel like there is kind of an interesting mystery going on. I don't hate the movie, and the vibe is obviously very similar to Asylum. A lot of variety in those recommendations, so I hope you throw at least one of those on your watch list. Now, season 3, the best season ever made of American Horror Story, is obviously Coven. It follows a girls' school for witches in New Orleans, and they deal with sort of turf battles with the other witches that practice voodoo in the area. It's a great season. There is so much to Coven. I've rewatched it like 3 or 4 times now, and these are pretty obvious recommendations, so I won't linger here. Practical Magic and The Craft are the top witch movies that I would recommend that you watch if you enjoyed Coven. They're both from the 90s, so they have a really similar vibe to this season because I feel like the attire, the wardrobe is really similar. There's also so much focus on the aesthetics of witchcraft, especially I would say in The Craft. So those are obvious recommendations, but I would also recommend Eve's Bayou. This one is definitely more of a drama than a horror, but there are some elements in it that I feel like are similar to Coven. For one thing, it's set in Louisiana, so it's just gorgeous. It's a wonderful location. That's part of why I love Coven so much. But for another, there are a couple scenes where there is a focus on voodoo witchcraft, and so it does tie in a little bit. Now, season 4 is also very obvious. I don't need to linger here, but with Freak Show, there is the motif of Twisty the Clown, and so I'm gonna recommend some clown movies to you. Probably the most basic of them all would be It from 2017. I probably wouldn't recommend the original It from 1990 if you're a fan of Freak Show. The tone is completely different, and Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise kind of does remind me of Twisty the Clown. The other obvious choice would be Terrifier, and really just because Terrifier is so grimy, gritty, nasty, gory, but I feel like if you enjoy Twisty for him being a really silent clown, then you'd also love Art the Clown. If you don't know Art the Clown, you need to be introduced, okay? But if you don't watch a lot of horror movies and you're planning on just diving right in with Terrifier, I don't know if I recommend that because I feel like you'll watch it and you'll be like, why did she do this to me? The answer is sadism. But anyways, I feel like those are pretty obvious, so we can move on to season 5, which is Hotel, and another one one of my absolute favorite seasons. This is one of my favorite seasons because it has all the best cast members, maybe minus Emma Roberts. But Lady Gaga as the Countess, I will never ever get over this. I love her so much, and Matt Bomer is in this. I love him. And hotel horror is a subgenre that I feel like I'm kind of lacking in. I would love to know more haunted hotel movies. Drop them in the comments. That was what I wanted to focus on personally with my pairing for this season, and so my recommendation is 1408. Because I do feel like Hotel focuses on a lot of the weird goings-on in hotels. It is based on the real-life Cecil Hotel, right, in Los Angeles. There are so many just absolutely bonkers, tragic stories about that hotel, and so I see why they based this season on it. A little bit exploitative maybe, but nonetheless. 1408 also focuses on that. The first act of 1408 I think is flawless. It really starts to derail in the third act. If it had just kept that tone and it was consistent, 1408 could be a perfect film. But the first act really has a focus on the goings-on in hotels, and I would say a focus on how much we probably don't want to know about the hotels that we stay in. It has a similar dark vibe to Hotel, and also the acting of John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson are the highlight. And you could really pair any gory vampire movie with this season too. I didn't really pick any in particular though. So moving on to season 6, which would be Roanoke, and in my opinion, one of the worst seasons of the show. But it deals a little bit with colonization because there is this focus on this disappeared colony in Roanoke. And so I didn't try that hard for this one. I was like, let me just find a period piece that deals with colonialism, and of course I went with The Witch. This is one of my favorite witch movies of all time. You probably saw this coming. Really the only reason why I paired this one with Roanoke is because it takes place in the 1600s. I don't think that thematically they're very similar. I can't remember because I feel like Roanoke is so forgettable. But if you enjoy the period piece aspect of Roanoke, then you should definitely check out The Witch. Season 7 of American Horror Story, aka Cult, aka one of the worst things I've ever seen. Not for any lack of talent in the writing department or anything like that. It's just the content of Cult is so not for me. I get to live in America, okay? I don't need a show that realizes all of my worst fears about Donald Trump supporters. Like, I frankly don't need that. However, I did think that there were some pretty good cult movies to pair with this season. The first of which being The Invitation. I could have gone with the obvious choice Midsommar, but I don't feel like tonally they're similar at all. I think that one is still on Netflix, a highly underrated film. I adore it. It's also directed by Karen Kusama, who also directed Jennifer's Body. The other cult movie that I would recommend to pair with this one would be Sound of My Voice. This is not the strongest movie, but I do think where it is strong is how it depicts, again, the descent into the belief system. Because if I recall, it's about these two people that are basically doing research on this cult, and then, you know, things happen. It's left incredibly open-ended, I would even say frustratingly so, but it's one that sticks with you and definitely makes you think. Season 8 is basically just Coven 2.0, but it's called Apocalypse, and the first couple episodes, they are a bit apocalyptic. They're also kind of culty though, but I don't know. So I just came up with one recommendation for this one. It's not really that similar, but Knock at the Cabin, I thought that I would throw a newer movie on this list. I put this one on here because there is a similar theme of some people not actually experiencing the apocalypse and like toying with their belief of it actually happening. Both that season and the movie do play into that. So that was kind of my only tie-in. There are other apocalypse movies. I guess you could say like a lot of zombie movies are similar in that way. You could choose like I Am Legend maybe. I have not seen that movie since I was a child though, so I couldn't tell you if that's a really accurate pairing, but it kind of feels right. Anyway, I think that's also one of the worst seasons. I'm sorry, I love The Witches, but it was sloppy, okay? Let's be real. Season 9, I also feel like is one of the worst seasons of American Horror Story. It's called 1984, and it is a rehash of so many previous seasons, but it's all under the guise of being like a Friday the 13th reboot. So that being said, just watch a Friday the 13th movie. I don't think this season of the show is worth watching. There are so many fun slashers that you could watch instead that aren't dragged out into like 10 or 12 episodes. episodes. So moving right along to the last season that I've seen, season 10. This season is really weird. It's split into these two sections, and so I only have recommendations for the alien portion of the season, which is only like 4 episodes. The other half of the season is 6 episodes, and it deals with this writer that basically stumbles upon the limitless pill, but it also like turns them into vampires. It's a weird season. So I'm gonna focus on the aliens, and my first recommendation would be Phoenix Forgotten. What I enjoyed about the alien part of the season was sort of the conspiracy theorist side of it. I enjoyed them kind of rewriting history in terms of all the conspiracy theories about JFK and Marilyn Monroe. And Phoenix Forgotten is a found footage movie, and the premise is that it's a documentary about this girl who is on the hunt for her missing brother. And it's non-linear, it goes back and forth from her and the footage that they found in the desert after their disappearance. So in either show and movie, I kind of like the investigative tone of them. And another movie that I feel like has a similar investigative tone is Knowing. This movie is ridiculous. It stars Nick Cage. I think it came out in the early 2000s. And again, it's not really good, but also maybe you could recommend this one with Apocalypse because it also is sort of an apocalyptic situation. There's these natural disasters that are occurring, and Nick Cage sort of finds all the clues and like pieces everything together to get down to the bottom of what's happening. So I hate to say again that yeah, this movie, it's not that good, but like it's entertaining and still worth the watch. I love a lot of movies that are so bad that they're good. I think Knowing is genuinely really entertaining and kind of underrated, especially if you love Nick Cage. I mean, Renfield is coming out soon, so 'tis the season, but I won't try to convince you any further. That is all I have for all of my American Horror Story recommendations, so we can move on now. Up next, we have Hannibal. This is, without a doubt, probably my favorite TV show of all time. I love this show more than life itself. I would do bad things for that man, Mads Mikkelsen, and also Hugh Dancy. Hugh Dancy has been my prince for the last 20 years, for my whole life, basically. Anyways, so the movies that I've chosen, it's for a plethora of different reasons, actually, so let's get into it. Hannibal is a sexy show, okay? Hannibal and Will Graham, they have this sort of twin flame soul connection. It's very subtextually homoerotic with no overt romance. It's just this very, very intimate cannibalism show. But there's also a ton of investigative work and police work. So lots of recommendations to go along with this show. Number 1 would be Bones and All. This is also a new release from last year. Probably the most similar to Hannibal, given that it is a cannibal love story. Now, I personally did not love Bones and All. It was a little bit too dark and depressing and long and slow for me, but basically everybody else loved it. I'm kind of on an island over here, and so you might like it, especially if you like Hannibal. Up next would be Jennifer's Body. I love that I already mentioned this movie today. Jennifer's Body is another homoerotic, basically cannibalism story. Jennifer just happens to be a succubus. She's not quite human, so I don't know if this qualifies as cannibalism, but Needy and Jennifer are kind of like the girly versions of Hannibal and Will. So lot to love there, but if that's not why you love Hannibal, if you love it more so for the police work, the FBI investigative work, then I would recommend Zodiac. I don't think I need to explain to you how good this movie is. This movie receives so much acclaim, and obviously it's about the Zodiac killer, so not much to explain there, but I feel like the bleak atmosphere of it and the investigative work is very similar to the show. This is also my war cry to get that show renewed. Who do I need to sleep with at Netflix or HBO? I'm kidding, by the way, gross, but I'm speaking in such an aggressive hyperbole because I need this show to be renewed. Who are the cowards to blame? Who do I need to blame for me not getting more content of this show? Whatever, I know I need to make my peace with that. Let's move on. Up next, we have Stranger Things, one of the biggest shows in the whole wide world, so probably don't need to explain that synopsis. The movies I would recommend to pair with Stranger Things are, first of all, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, especially because our beloved Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund, starred in season 4 of Stranger Things. So much of season 4 of Stranger Things was inspired by the original Nightmare on Elm Street. That is probably one of the easiest pairings on this list, and so I decided to throw some other movies in here as well, and that would be the Fear Street trilogy that came out in the summer of 2021. And obviously similar vibe since these are both produced by Netflix, but Fear Street also follows kids. They are also period pieces. They take place in the 90s and the 70s, and then all the way back in the 1600s. So if you love period pieces, if you kind of love that nostalgic vibe about Stranger Things, then you would love Fear Street. The tones are incredibly similar, but rather than more of a sci-fi element going on, there is more of a paranormal element going on in Fear Street. I think that anyone who loves Stranger Things would also love Fear Street. That's how it worked out for me personally. Getting back to proper horror, let's talk talk about Yellowjackets. This show took me way too long to watch. I fucking love it. My favorite thing about this show is definitely the Lord of the Flies type vibe where the girls are trying to figure out how to govern themselves and survive in the wilderness. And something that has strikingly similar themes is Wrong Turn from 2021. This is a reboot of the, I guess, cult classic slasher from 2003. And I don't want to give anything else away because I kind of already have given the themes that I just mentioned. But another thing that I love about both the show and the movie are the fact that they are shot on location in nature. That really comes through. I love a good forest horror movie, any horror movie taking place in nature, because the natural elements can be so intense and almost kind of live as a character themselves. I feel like the landscape really comes alive in both Yellowjackets and Wrong Turn. So if you love Wrong Turn, watch Yellowjackets. If you love Yellowjackets, watch Wrong Turn. Trust me. Up next, we have Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House. My biggest takeaway from this is not so much the paranormal, but rather the family drama. That's what Mike Flanagan is best at. I feel like Mike Flanagan loves people and he loves humanity and he loves commenting on some of the best parts of it. But with the best parts are kind of mirrored all of the worst parts, and that's where the horror comes in, I feel like. So my main takeaway from The Haunting of Hill House, which I am rewatching right now actually, is all of the family drama. So that being said, the pairing that I recommend with this show would be Hereditary. Also immaculate timing to watch this movie because Ari Aster's Beau is Afraid is coming out this weekend. Who else is excited? Show of hands. Show of hands. Make some noise. Make some noise. I am so excited for Beau is Afraid. But anyways, Hereditary. If you haven't seen this movie, like, what are you doing? No, that's not fair to say because I did preface this video with like, if you're more of a TV watcher, you haven't really gotten into horror movies yet, well, Hereditary is an intense one. To put it lightly, it's a movie that may or may not be a little bit traumatizing on the first watch. I would say it's pretty heavy on the horror, but Ari Aster really stresses that he wanted to make a family drama movie. That was first and foremost his intention. And so I feel like he and Mike Flanagan both really have a talent for that. I wouldn't say the tone is very similar. I think that Hereditary is a lot darker. So if you would prefer perhaps a more nihilistic take on family, then Hereditary's one of your better options. Now this next one is very obvious, I know, but I feel like it had to be said. If you are enjoying the Chucky TV show and somehow you have never watched the Chucky franchise, you get on that right away, right away. I also couldn't single out a single movie from the franchise to point you to because I feel like in terms of consistency of the storyline, Child's Play is probably one of the better ones. It's not great. Like, I don't think there's any horror franchise that is. No, except for Scream. Scream maintains continuity and it's wonderful and there is not a bad movie in that franchise. But Child's Play, I don't think there is a bad movie in that franchise. A lot of people will tell you, oh, Seed of Chucky is bad. They might say Cult of Chucky is bad. A lot of people don't like Child's Play 3, ignore those people. Just watch the franchise, enjoy it. Every movie has its own little special, unique flavor, and it's wonderful. Moving on to another Mike Flanagan show, The Haunting of Bly Manor. This one is definitely much more heavy on the drama, I would say, than the horror, and it was really slow for me. I personally didn't really enjoy it. I know you probably think that I would recommend one of the adaptations of Turn of the Screw because that's what Bly Manor is based on. I actually would not, because I don't think I've seen a single one of those adaptations. There was one that came out with Finn Wolfhard in like, what, 2018, 2019, and nobody saw it because it was really bad, so I haven't watched that one. What I would recommend to you to pair with this show would be The Others. This is a really underrated paranormal movie that stars Nicole Kidman, so more people should watch it. It has a really similar bleak kind of empty atmosphere. They live in this really big dark house and it's just the three of them really, and it is similarly a bit slow and dramatic, but I think the storytelling in The Others is a bit stronger. There are some really unique turns that I don't think you'll see coming. I would recommend that one, I think, mostly for the atmosphere, but of course Nicole Kidman is always great, and I like the little twisty turns they take you on. Now moving on to the cultural sensation that is Pretty Little Liars. Now, if you don't know this show, oh mama. This show had a chokehold on the youth of America, let me tell you. This follows a group of teenagers, and it's a year after the disappearance of one of their very best friends. They get these mysterious messages from an entity called A that basically torments them. A is constantly threatening to expose their secrets and harm them, and there is death in this show. There's drama. It is so intense. It is like one of the best shows ever made, except that it started to really fall off after season 3. They tricked us all. They really tricked us all. Marlene King was like, we have a plan, and everyone was like so neurotic about dissecting every single little clue from the show, and they totally played into it. Marlene King was like, yep, yes, and this, and that might lead to this, and it's all a grand master plan. And that was bullshit, but that's a conversation for another day. But anyways, if you enjoyed Pretty Little Liars, you simply must watch I Know What You Did Last Summer. I Know What You Did Last Summer is the original Pretty Little Liars, and no one can tell me different. The biggest standout is the little notes that they're left by the killer. The killer in I Know What You Did Last Summer is also harboring all of their secrets and threatening them, and there is death and destruction and drama. It is also one of the best slashers to come out of the 90s, second only to Scream, I would say. It's just so much fun. If you like Pretty Little Liars, then you are going to love a good handful of teen slashers. Chief among them, in my opinion, would be I Know What You Did Last Summer, so get on that. Also, look, this is literally a screen grab from the Pretty Little Liars trailer. A direct homage. Up next, we have Midnight Mass. This is the last Mike Flanagan show that I'm going to talk about. My main takeaway from Midnight Mass, yes, all the acting is incredible. Again, wonderful commentary on the human condition, etc. My main takeaway was the really unique sort of take on the creatures of the show. I don't want to say much more because I don't want to give any spoilers. And the movies that I recommend are not necessarily the same as the creatures in the show, so that's not really going to spoil it, but it might give you a little idea because the first movie that I want to recommend is 30 Days of Night. This is one of the more underrated vampire movies, I would say. Again, I have to stress that it's not going to be one of the best movies you've ever seen, but it is really entertaining. And it is highly unique. Like, I have never seen vampires that looked like this in another vampire movie. They're not the typical sexy portrayal. They are much more giving creature. So I don't know why. Maybe there is not that much of a tie-in with that movie and the show, but I felt like there was. And a same inexplicable tie-in that I have is The Descent. That is my other recommendation if you enjoy Midnight Mass. The Descent, though, it's also because there is commentary on the human condition. There is so much drama between all the women characters in that movie, but crazily enough, that is so well balanced with all of the horrors that they face while being trapped in this cave system. So talk about claustrophobia. That one, I mean, it is really different to Midnight Mass, I would say, but just go in blind, enjoy the ride, and then maybe get back to me, because I feel like they are more similar than you might think. Moving on to one of the biggest sensations of 2023 so far, The Last of Us. I think everyone and their mother and their father and their dog and their pet fucking guinea pig has seen The Last of Us. So I don't know if I need to explain this show, but basically it is sort of a zombie show. It's about this fungal infection that takes over the world, and it's very much giving like The Walking Dead in terms of the fallout that the humans experience. But the movie that I would recommend to pair with this show would be The Girl with All the Gifts. This weirdly also deals with fungal spores, and it deals with children and their relation to some of the adults in the movie too. But both the show and the movie, I feel like, have subtext that's really saying that children are the future. The younger generations are really who are gonna step up and save us, basically. I think the show and the movie both have a really strong through line of that theme. And I didn't personally love The Girl with All the Gifts. It has a very weird vibe, but now that I think back on it, it's really, really similar to The Last of Us. I think that one was a Netflix original, so it should still be on Netflix. Kind of an underrated zombie movie, in my opinion. I am not big on zombie movies, but that one is highly unique. Up next would be a little show called The Vampire Diaries. Now, if you're a horror fan, you've been around on my channel, you know that this was written by Kevin Williamson, who also wrote Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'm stumbling on my words, I'm getting so excited because I love him. And frankly, you should already know what I'm gonna pair this with. Twilight, okay? It feels ridiculous that I even need to clarify that. We should all know. Both The Vampire Diaries and Twilight feature the most engaging will they won't they threesomes of all time. Oh my god, not actual like threesomes, but like, wait, hold on, wait, what is it called? When a love triangle. They have love triangles, not threesomes. Jesus Christ. Both of them are extremely sexy. If you love one and haven't seen the other, what are you doing? That one's really self-explanatory, so let's just move on. Did you also enjoy the Goosebumps show from the 90s, developed from the classic R.L. Stein books? R.L. Stein? R.L. Stein. I can never remember because like it's a 50-50 shot. You know what I'm talking about. That show is so bad. It is so low quality and so ridiculous, but fun fact, Ryan Gosling stars in the very first episode. I love that show. It's just very comforting comforting to me because I grew up with it. But I think that a wonderful pairing to go with it would be Creepshow. The show is from the 90s, that movie is from the 80s, but I feel like tonally they're completely similar, and also Creepshow is an anthology just like the show. Creepshow is just so much fun. And also, oh, that being said, if you love Creepshow the movie, check out Creepshow the TV show on Shudder. Love that show. Adore Creepshow to death. That's another very obvious pairing, so don't need to linger there. But that pairing is really for my anthology lovers out there. Switching gears now to talk about The Outsider. This is, honest to God, one of the best Stephen King adaptations that has ever existed. So The Outsider starts as what seems like a really simple investigation because this young boy has been murdered in this small town, but then things aren't necessarily as they appear, as it seems like there might sort of be a supernatural edge to what's going on. It is such a good show. I can't stress to you enough how badly you need to watch this. I would say that it's of a similar quality, almost as good as the show Hannibal, and that is saying something. One of the most consistent thematic through lines of the show is like, do you really know your neighbor? It's not quite that, but I don't want to give anything else away. And I don't think that my pairing at all spoils the show. It's just, it has a similar theme. Like, if you've seen both, then hopefully you'll get what I'm saying. But I paired it with The Invisible Man from 2020. I decided to pair these together because I feel like both of them kind of also give you that feeling of being stalked. They both also kind of give you that feeling of not knowing who you can trust around you. So very much also on the theme of like paranoia. If you enjoyed that about The Invisible Man, definitely watch the show and vice versa. Another thing they have in common is that they're both exquisitely shot. They are both gorgeous pieces of art. So if you love a good, crisp looking, well shot, well composed piece of media, then give both of these a go. Up next we have The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and now unfortunately I've only ever seen the first season of this show, so I do need to go back and finish it. But a really fun little show about Satanism and witchcraft. So I already did give you my recommendations for witchcraft movies, and so I'm gonna do something a little bit different. With this one, I would recommend the movie Satanic Panic. This movie is terrible, by the way. It is so bad, but just bear with it for like the first 10 to 15 minutes, because beyond that point, it really picks up. It gets so bonkers. I think it's really funny and I have a good time with it, but you have to be really committed to enjoying a bad movie. So I'm just gonna put that out there up front. But given the title, there is also a lot of Satan worship in this movie. I guess you could say it's also kind of witchcraft. So lots of really similar imagery and vibes, basically, to both that show and this movie. Moving on to another one that I have a little bit more to say about would be Swarm. I did just talk about this one in my last video during my March recap, but if you weren't there for that one, then here we go. Swarm is based on the true stories and internet rumors about the Bay Hive, the really intense cult following that Beyonce has. So things get dark, there are thrills, there is mayhem and murder in that show, but the main theme is, of course, obsession and parasocial relationships. Now, there are definitely a ton of social media horror movies these days, and maybe those would be better to pair, but the one that stuck out to me that I decided to pair with Swarm is Ma. I think it's because of the similar performances of Dominique Fishback and Octavia Spencer, both incredible actresses, but Ma deals with obsession, and I really didn't like that movie, but I feel like I'm kind of due for a rewatch. It is worth watching, and in my opinion, rewatching because of Octavia Spencer. And Swarm for me was worth watching because of Dominique Fishback. I wasn't like the biggest fan of the show, but what carried me through was the acting. Now, Ma might not be obsessed with a big R&B singer, but she is obsessed with this group of children. So definitely similar thematic through lines there, I think. But beyond that, not too much in common with one another. Although another show that you could probably pair with Swarm would be You. I didn't include that one on my list because I don't feel like it's really horror quite as much. That's also why I didn't include Dead to Me, even though Dead to Me and You, they both include like a lot of murder and a fair amount of gore. Same with like Dexter, although I mean with all of those, I guess if you just enjoy the theme of like a man cutting a bunch of people up, then just watch Terrifier. I could recommend that one with all of those shows, I guess. Anyways, moving on to Squid Game. I know I was just talking about how like those other shows I wouldn't necessarily qualify as horror, even though I kind of do. Squid Game also a little bit iffy, but Squid Game is really horrific to me personally. I don't know about you guys, I feel like it is a horror show and was one of the biggest sensations ever, and so season 2, I don't know, when is that coming? They announced it, there's no release date, I don't know how long that's gonna take. So in the meantime, I do think one that I recommended earlier also pairs well with Squid Game. That would be the Belko Experiment, because Squid Game really deals with the morality of the contestants. They're all competing for money, but they develop relationships relationships with the people in the games. A lot of the time, they have to choose whether they want the prize and screw someone over, or if they want to help their teammate and maybe take a chance at losing. But the cost of losing is often their life, so the stakes are really high. That's just a wonderful thing about both Squid Game and the Belko Experiment. But the other really obvious pairings I think that go with Squid Game are definitely the Saw franchise and the escape room movies. You probably know about Saw, right? You gotta solve Jigsaw's riddles and his puzzles and, you know, maybe chop off a limb or two in the process to save your ass. Escape Room is like the PG-13 rated version of Saw, but way more fun, set pieces, and a little bit more action. Don't think I need to explain too much there, so let's move on. Up next is Santa Clarita Diet. Again, I must signal my war cry to renew this fucking show. It's so good. I miss them so much. They left the last season on a goddamn cliffhanger. Like, how could they do this to us? I will get so fiery and I will start sweating if I keep talking about that. So my pairing, let's get on with my pairing. That would be Warm Bodies. Both the movie and the show feature a really unlikely couple who have to deal with the fact that they want to eat people. And that's really all there is to it. I think that even tonally, a lot of the humor is very similar. They're both extremely goofy and both very self-aware, which I love when a movie or show can do that and pull it off. That's why we love Scream so much. So yeah, if you love a good dark comedy, then I highly recommend both Santa Clarita Diet and Warm Bodies. Up next, I want to lump together two Shudder shows because they are both documentary shows. Eli Roth's History of Horror and Cursed Films are both shows on Shudder that I really enjoyed, definitely more so History of Horror. That's just a little bit more meaty and it's not based so much on like paranormal stories and conspiracy theories. But if you enjoyed either of those, then you absolutely have to watch Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. Shudder just makes really good documentaries, whether they be docu-series or actual documentaries, they're incredible. So really not much to say there. If you enjoy documentaries, I decided to throw that one on. Last up, the last horror show of the day to talk about is one of the longest reigning supreme, and that would be The Walking Dead. I only made it through, I think, about 4.5 seasons of that show before I gave up personally. Let me know down below where you gave up on that show. I know that there are still like some 2 million people that have been watching from the beginning and are still like diehard and they watch the spin-offs too. Good for you, couldn't be me. But my recommendation to go along with that show, if you're like me and you're not really that much of a zombie movie kind of person, I think this one is for you. The Crazies, starring Josh Duhamel, is so fantastic. I never tire of this movie. It scares me every single time I watch it. It is fantastic. It's also not your typical zombie movie. It's not a classic like reawakening of the dead type movie. It has its own unique spin on it. It's also a wonderful small town horror movie. If you love movies like It 2017 that have that like small town vibe, this one has it. It's maybe like one of my favorite horror movies. I don't know if I could say that because I haven't rewatched it in a couple years, but I adore it. And that's saying something for someone that doesn't really typically enjoy zombie content. And so if you're the same way, maybe you like that one too. But that is gonna do it for all of my recommendations today. I thought that was just a fun little bonus video that I could throw your way while you're waiting for the Oscars. I hope that you enjoyed. Also find my social media linked down below because I'm doing a giveaway on Instagram and it'll be open until the end of the month. But by now you've probably noticed these names scrolling on screen. These are my wonderful patrons. If you would like to give me a little extra support every month, that would be really appreciated. And in return, I do make 4 to 6 bonus videos every single month for those guys. So for example, right after I finish shooting this video, I'm gonna shoot my individual reviews of Dungeons and Dragons and Super Mario Bros. So that's where I put the shorter solo reviews of movies that I don't want to do huge deep dives on. Those go on Patreon. But if that's not for you, again, all the rest of my social media is linked down below. Please let me know any of your recommendations for any horror shows that I should watch because I am getting back into watching series and I'm excited about that. I'm sure that there is a wide world of things that I have yet to see, so please don't be shy. But other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that I catch you in the next one. This is your unholy ruler signing off.